What is going on, everybody? Greg Ehrenberg here from Stokastic, and I'm about to break down a card that I'm really excited for. Kamaru Usman, Leon Edwards 3. The rubber match. Kamaru Usman won the first fight. Edwards won the second fight in spectacular fashion with the come from behind head kick. And I'm going to be breaking down that fight in a little bit, but also very excited to announce that we are sponsored today by DraftKings Rainmakers. If you guys haven't signed up or played over at DraftKings and used the Rainmakers product, they do have a really great offer right now. You sign up, you get a free starter pack for the PGA product. Totally free. You're going to get a handful of players that you guys could go out and use at no cost to yourself to build some lineups and play in some contests. There's a link for that below. Click on that. It's going to direct you to DraftKings and collect your free starter pack for PGA. For today, though, we are going to be covering MMA. I'm going to open some packs at the end of this. And I'm going to be walking through some of my favorite Rainmakers targets for the UFC card this weekend. And then, of course, as we lead up to that, I'm going to be doing all my normal stuff here. We're going to be walking through my favorite DFS plays. And then also, I have a best bet that I'm going to give out as well. So let's get into it. Got my screen sharing here. I know all the right settings to use now on StreamYard, which I didn't really know at first. I was very concerned about what other tabs you guys were going to see on my computer. Not anymore. We've got to figure it out on these parts. And let's start breaking down the slate, getting into the main event right away. I love Kamaru Usman in this spot. And I understand some of the concerns people might have with Usman. He was knocked out in his last fight. We've never seen Kamaru Usman knocked out before. We've never even seen Kamaru Usman lose in the UFC before. But I can't ignore all of the other rounds we saw in between Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards, because that was a fight that Usman was dominating up until that final minute of the fight. And what's more likely to happen in this fight, right? Is it more likely that we see Edwards land another head kick in the same way he did last time? Or to me, it's much more predictable. All the minutes, all the exchange that Usman won up until that point, it's much more predictive of how I think the next fight will go. And unless Usman just age, injuries, and the knockout catches up to him. But I think that's a much lower likelihood, and I'm going to be pretty high on Kamaru Usman in this matchup. And at least relative to our current ownership projections, Usman is expected to be the most popular fighter on this slate, but Edwards is also expected to be the second most popular value play. So I do think that going really heavy and overweight on Usman while coming in underweight to Leon Edwards does offer some leverage in large field tournaments. And something else about that last fight, too, that's really interesting from a DFS standpoint. Despite Edwards winning by KO, Usman actually outscored him on DraftKings. And if we get into some of the stats here, you guys will see why. So Kamaru Usman in that fight, here's all of the amount of damage, the strikes, the takedowns he was able to land. He landed 5 takedowns in 4+ rounds against Kamaru. Kamaru Usman landed 4+ takedowns against Leon Edwards. But then also the significant strikes. Usman outlanded him 83-55. The strikes. Usman outlanded him 189-64 because there's a lot of ground strikes in there. There was a lot of strikes in the clinch that were not considered significant. Control time, which is going to be huge, because if Kamaru Usman is controlling Leon Edwards, you can't get knocked out when you're controlling somebody. So we saw Usman be pretty aggressive with the wrestling in the last fight. I think he's going to be even more aggressive in this one, considering all the success he had in that department. Ended up landing 5 of 12 takedowns. And like I said, 10.5 minutes of control time. That is a massive amount for Kamaru Usman. And I do think there's an opportunity for him to even more aggressively look to wrestle, avoid all of the danger, and get Leon Edwards on the back foot, control him, mitigate the damage you could potentially land from strikes there. Because when we saw Usman be really successful in their last fight, it was when he had Edwards on the back foot. When Edwards was getting backed up, when Edwards was up against the cage, he had really no success in that fight, and he wasn't really able to get out of some of those bad spots either. It wasn't that Usman was consistently taking him down with 100% of his takedown attempts, but even when he had him pushed up against the cage, it was clearly Usman who was winning those exchanges in terms of if it was going to the judges' scorecards. We were a minute away from Usman winning that fight, 49-46 on all 3 judges' scorecards. So I do think that we're going to see Usman get back to a more wrestle-heavy game plan. I don't think he's going to take as many risks at range. I don't think he's going to have a lack in focus like he had towards the tail end of the 5th round. I think he wins, and I think he puts up a massive score for DraftKings. So I'm anticipating Usman is going to be my most rostered fighter this weekend, and I'm not going to be particularly heavy on Leon Edwards. Once again, I understand how the last fight went. I don't necessarily think it was fluky. I think the setup by Leon Edwards, the way that he worked the body to ultimately get Kamaru Usman to drop his guard and open up the head kick, it was not lucky. But I also don't think it was necessarily something that was replicable, and something also that happened because Kamaru Usman had a lapse in focus that I do not think he will allow to happen in their 3rd fight. So Kamaru Usman, he's going to be the fighter I overall get the most exposure to. And getting into my next fight that I'm going to be targeting, it is the co-main event between Justin Gaethje and Rafael Fiziev. And we're pulling the stats up for this one right here. I think one thing that we should take note of is that there's going to be a lot of violence in this fight. No matter who wins, I do expect a fairly big score, and I do favor Fiziev to win the fight. However, here is why, as I'm starting to build out lineups, I'm starting to think I'm going to target Gaethje heavier than I was going to when I first looked at the matchup, because we've seen Fiziev as a pretty big favorite. There's been line movement in favor of Fiziev, which I actually do agree with. I think this is a fight that Fiziev wins more often than not. But here's where ownership comes into play in large field tournaments on DK. We currently have Justin Gaethje projected for 18% ownership. People are not playing Justin Gaethje in this spot, and it's not a great matchup for him. I do think Fiziev is more likely to win. I think Fiziev is fairly likely to knock out Justin Gaethje, but if Gaethje wins, he is almost certainly putting up a score that's going to be optimal. I do not see a scenario where Gaethje wins and does not put up a big score, and he's only $7,400 on DraftKings. If he wins, he is breaking the slate, and nobody's playing him right now. Relative nobody. He's projected for 18% ownership. And there is lineup construction is really difficult this week. It's hard to find cheap fighters to really feel confident about. So even if I'm not going to be playing Justin Gaethje and I was looking to play somebody else in this range, like a Brian Barberena, who's projected for comparable ownership, Jennifer Maia is projected for comparable ownership, Luana Carolina is projected for comparable ownership, I don't feel great about any of their chances to win either. Here's the difference, though. If Justin Gaethje wins, I think he scores more points than all those other fighters I just mentioned when they win. And that makes a really big difference to me. And you look at some of the striking stats, as good of a striker as Fiziev is, it's not like he isn't hittable. Not as hittable as Justin Gaethje, obviously. Gaethje absorbs 7.85 significant strikes per minute, but still, Fiziev has a negative striking differential, and he absorbs 4.86 significant strikes per minute. And there's a very clear opportunity here for Justin Gaethje to get Fiziev on the back foot, pressure him immensely. And is there an opportunity for Gaethje to make this fight look like the third round of Fiziev against Bobby Green? If you guys remember that fight, I'll pull up the stats right here. Bobby Green ended up losing the first two rounds, in my opinion, pretty clearly to Fiziev. And then Bobby Green really put it on Fiziev in the third round when he started to get more aggressive, started to get some forward pressure going, and didn't allow Fiziev to set his feet. So look at some of the per round striking stats in that fight. First round, even if we're looking at just the numeric totals, I know that these are just numeric. They're not necessarily indicative of who did the most damage, but still, first round between Bobby Green and Fiziev, the strike numbers were fairly close. Fiziev landed the much cleaner strikes. He landed the much harder shots. So that's why he won the first round, even though Bobby Green numerically outstruck him. The same thing could be said in round two. 45 to 36 in significant strikes, but Fiziev was landing the much harder and more damaging strikes. By the time we got to the third round, though, where Bobby Green basically said, F it. I'm down 2-0 on the scorecards. If I'm going to win, I need to finish. He started putting a crazy amount of pressure on Fiziev, and Fiziev really had a hard time keeping up with it. Bobby Green landed 66 significant strikes in that third round. I think that is a game plan Justin Gaethje could see, and I think you borrow from that. It's going to be a lot of danger. He's going to be opening up himself to the risk of Fiziev landing a big shot on him, but Justin Gaethje's used to playing in the fire. And I think that if he can survive some of the early exchanges from Fiziev, I think we could see Justin Gaethje end up with a late finish in this fight and maybe really overwhelm Fiziev with some of the pace and pressure. So I'm not overly confident in Gaethje winning, but I think relative to the other options we have on the cheap end, I think that he's definitely the best play with the most upside on DraftKings as we start to go into like that, $7,800 and below range. And also, I'm about to talk about somebody else who I really do not like for this weekend because of his ownership. We have Roman Dolidze currently projected for 40% ownership on DraftKings. Now, the reason that Dolidze is projected for a lot of ownership is, well, he's been coming through as an underdog a lot lately. If you look at some of the recent fights for Roman Dolidze, the win over Jack Hermanson, I was on Hermanson in that spot, did not see that coming. It was a super impressive grappling exchange that he had to win. The win over Phil Hawes where he finished him, the win over Daukaus where he dropped him twice with knees and just really beat the shit out of him. They were all really impressive wins, and Dolidze was not a favorite in any of those fights. But I think this is a really good stylistic matchup for Marvin Vittori, and that's why I'm ultimately favoring Vittori in this fight. And I'm not going to be super heavy on Vittori on DraftKings for this weekend because I don't think Vittori is going to score as many points as some of the other fighters priced around him. But I think there's a lot of leverage to be gained just by fading Roman Dolidze and playing some other value plays in his place, because Dolidze is currently projected for 40% ownership. We do not have a single other fighter sub 8K in our projections projected for over 20% ownership. And by the way, if you guys want access to those ownership projections, sign up for Stokastic Plus Platinum membership. You get access to all of our tools for every single sport. And if you use the link below, you're going to get 50% off. But the 50% ownership for 40% ownership for Dolidze is way too high for me in a matchup that I just frankly don't expect him to win. And then also, if we compare him to like a Justin Gaethje I talked about before, I think the win probability of Gaethje is probably higher than Dolidze, and I think Gaethje scores better in a win than Dolidze would in a win. Look at some of these numbers here. If the fight plays out on the feet, Marvin Vittori has all the advantages. He lands far more significant strikes per minute than Roman Dolidze, nearly double what he lands. And then even though we do see Vittori get hit a little bit more often, he's nearly impossible to hurt. And I think part of it too is Vittori might not have a brain. I think he's too dumb to actually feel any kind of pain or get hurt. I mean, we saw him in the fight against Paulo Costa. He was eating head kicks like they were pancakes. They were nothing to Marvin Vittori. So I don't think Dolidze could hurt Vittori on the feet, because we've seen Vittori fight Paulo Costa. We've seen him fight Israel Adesanya multiple times. We've seen him fight Robert Whittaker. And these were fighters who were not able to finish Marvin Vittori. And Dolidze is not as dangerous or not as well-rounded as a striker as those fighters are. So I don't see that as a path to victory for Roman Dolidze. Then we get into Dolidze as a great grappler. But Marvin Vittori is a pretty good grappler. And I think Marvin Vittori is way more likely to be holding top control in this fight than Dolidze does. The reason being, Dolidze is a 33% takedown defense. Marvin Vittori, 74% takedown defense. So who's more likely to land takedowns in this fight? I have to lean towards Marvin Vittori. And if Marvin Vittori's on top, considering his acumen as a BJJ practitioner, I don't think that we're going to see Dolidze submit a Marvin Vittori when he's on his back. I think we would have to see Dolidze in top position in order to submit Vittori. But Vittori is 74% takedown defense. He's a hard man to take down. So I think that Vittori has all the advantages in this fight. I think the line's a little bit too wide to bet him. I'm not going to bet Vittori. I did consider it earlier in the week, but I do favor him enough in this matchup to where one of the things that I'm going to be targeting in GPPs is just not playing Roman Dolidze. I think there's a lot of leverage to be gained on the field that way. If he ends up finishing Vittori, I'm screwed this weekend. But I don't think that's very likely. Vittori is extremely difficult to finish. So those are some of my favorite DraftKings GPP targets, some of the ways I'm going about building my lineups. If you guys are playing in cash games, I think you probably should just stack the main event and go with Leon Edwards. I think this fight probably goes 5 rounds. It's really hard to find cheap fighters to feel confident in. So Leon Edwards is the one. Oh, by the way, I should restate something. Leon Edwards, other than Roman Dolidze, is the only cheap fighter projected for north of 20% ownership. And if you're choosing between the two of them in cash games based on ownership, I would go with Edwards over Dolidze. I think it's a much safer cash game combination. And also, even in a decision, I think Edwards is way more likely to outscore Dolidze than Dolidze in his decision with it given the 5 rounds. So I think you could get, like 30 or so fantasy points out of Edwards, 25 in a decision loss. That could be enough for cash games this week. A lot of really sketchy underdogs. So that's where I'm standing with some of my favorite DraftKings tournament plays and some of the ways I'm approaching tournaments. If you guys have any questions about that, let me know below in the comments or hit me up in Discord. It's one of the perks of having a Stokastic Plus Platinum membership. But let's get into one of my favorite bets of the weekend. By the way, I didn't intend for me to just be talking about the top 3 fights on the card, just kind of how some of the pricing worked and some of the things that I like for this weekend. But Gunnar Nelson, I'm betting him at plus money to win by submission. I think it is by far his most likely to path to victory against Brian Barberena, because Barberena has a couple of massive holes in his game. One of them is the takedown defense. 54% for Brian Barberena, and he's not typically fighting the highest level of competition. I know that RDA is a very good wrestler and grappler, but Barberena offered basically no resistance in that department against RDA. RDA ended up landing 4 of 6 takedowns here, ended up getting a submission in that fight. I think this fight goes really similarly. Gunnar Nelson's a really good grappler. He's not the best wrestler in the world, but Barberena's takedown defense is so poor that I think we should be able to see Nelson get this fight to the ground. And, still, he's a guy, he knows his path to victory. He knows that he is relying on the wrestling and grappling. So Nelson's pretty aggressive with it. He lands 1.86 takedowns per 15 minutes. I expect him to shoot for takedowns. I think he should land them against Barberena. And once they get to the mat, Gunnar Nelson is such a better grappler than Barberena, that I think it's pretty likely that we see Barberena end up getting submitted in this spot. Something we've already seen happen multiple times in Barberena's career. And we're getting Gunnar Nelson at plus money to win by submission. I think that's how he gets it done. Maybe as early as the first round, making him an upside play for DFS purposes. So Gunnar Nelson, somebody I like getting to. And also, just to read off some of the salaries of the top end fighters for this week and some of the projected ownerships, because I think that is information you guys would find valuable, and how hard it is to parse some of the upper range of fighters. We got Muhammad Mokaev at $9,700, a really steep price tag, projected for 34% ownership. Jack Shore projected for 20%. Juliana Miller, 31%. Jake Hadley projected for 16% ownership. So I think he's somebody who has a lot of finishing equity. I like him as a leverage play, or I shouldn't say leverage play. I like him as a pivot play off of some of these other high-end fighters. Gunnar Nelson coming in at 21%, and then Marvin Vittori at only 11%. I think if we're looking at those fighters, if we're including finishing equity and the ownership, Jake Hadley, a pretty good target at only 16% ownership, when all the other fighters around him are projected for about a similar amount of fantasy points, but are also coming in with more ownership. So the one difference is Vittori is projected for less ownership than Hadley, but we've Hadley projected for way more fantasy points. So Hadley more finishing equity than Marvin Vittori. He's my favorite tournament play if we're looking to be contrarian in the high end for this weekend. Now, I gave out my best bet. I gave out some of my favorite DFS plays. Let's talk about Rainmakers a little bit. Once again, guys, if you guys haven't checked it out, if you're interested in the PGA product, you can get one free starter pack using the link that we have below. But I also want to open up some packs here because I have a bunch sitting in my portfolio here. Try to move my account around a little bit so that you guys wouldn't just see like my account balance and all of that. But this should give you guys enough room to see some of the cards. And I have no clue what I'm going to get here. I already do have a ton of cards in my portfolio. I'm going to be building out lineups this weekend. And I'm going to be opening these packs as well. See, I'm sitting on 55 of them. So I'm going to have plenty of cards in my arsenal. And let's see what we're going to get. A little bit of an intro to MMA Rainmakers. The scoring is the same as MMA DFS as it typically works on DraftKings, but there's no salary cap and you just play the cards that are in your collection. So I'm going to be focusing on guys like Mokaev, Jack Shore, Juliana Miller. Our top projected fighter in our Stokastic projections for the weekend is Kamaru Usman. So I'm going to be playing a lot of Usman as well. And let's see what I get in the packs. I don't know what it's going to be. Something good. All right, so we got the pack opening. If I get something really good in here, all right, so we got two rare cards. You're guaranteed at least one rare card in each pack. So ideally, my rare cards, all right, Juliana Miller core, good. Going to want her in a lot of lineups. Ideally, for my rare cards, I'm going to want to get Mokaev, Jack Shore, Juliana Miller, Jake Hadley, Gunnar Nelson, Kamaru Usman. Those are the fighters that I mainly want to be building around for the purpose of this. There's no salary cap. Brian Barberena, useless for this. There's no salary cap. So we only have to worry about who's going to get finishes, who's going to get early finishes, or who's going to score extremely well. And that's where Kamaru Usman's another fighter that would come into play. The rares, Joanne Wood. And then the other rare here is Dusko Todorovic. Not the greatest pack in the world. Joanne Wood, I do think, is a serviceable contrarian option for DFS contests just because she is so much better than Luana Carolina and all the metrics favor her. It's just how washed is Joanne Wood, but she typically does score decently and win. So not a bad cheap target, I think, over for Rainmakers purposes. Open up one more pack and we'll see what we get in this one. Give me something good. So a bunch of different tiers of cards. There's cores, there's rares, and then there's also elite. There's legendaries and then Rainmakers, which are going to be the one of one. All right, I got an elite in this pack. So hopefully, and we'll start with the core cards. Hopefully I get something good and we go out on a high note. Gunnar Nelson, pretty good start to this pack. Leon Edwards, Veronica Hardy, formerly Veronica Macedo, now married to Dan Hardy. Another Joanne Wood. Give me a good elite. Perfect. Boom. Nailed it. Juliana Miller, one of the best fighters you could possibly get this weekend. I'm thrilled to be pulling her in a pack. So pretty good start here. If you guys want to go and play some DraftKings Rainmakers, you want to build some of your lineups, click on the link below. Go sign up at DraftKings. Go get some packs. There's still some available in the shop. And if you guys have any questions for me at all about Rainmakers or anything like that, let me know in the comment section. Hit me up over, let me go to the solo shot here. Working on my producing skills as I do this. Any questions you have for me, hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on Discord. I'll be answering any questions you guys have. And I'm also always sweating out all the events as we go. So guys, good luck this weekend. I hope you enjoy the card. end. Well, I hope you guys win if I don't win. I hope I win. If I don't win, I hope you guys do. Good luck this weekend.